A black genius boy steps into a courtroom built to break him. From the start, the judge tries to undermine his voice, but his words cut sharper than any lawyer's argument. In front of everyone, the judge is silenced, and the system trembles. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise that this will be the best story you will hear in your life. The frigid morning air bit through Marcus Taylor's threadbare suit as he climbed the imposing marble steps of the Boston County Courthouse. His fingers, numb from the cold, clutched a worn leather briefcase filled with carefully organized documents. Despite the chill, beads of sweat formed on his forehead. This wasn't just another day. This was his first real case, representing Mrs. Rose Jenkins, the elderly woman who had lived next door to him throughout his childhood. As Marcus pushed through the heavy oak doors, the bustling noise of the courthouse engulfed him. Attorneys, in tailored suits, conversed in hushed tones, their polished shoes clicking confidently across the marble floor. They exuded a sense of belonging that Marcus couldn't help but envy. At 26, he was younger than most, and his presence drew curious glances and raised eyebrows. "Excuse me, are you lost?" A court clerk eyed his weathered briefcase with suspicion. "The public assistance office is on the lower level." Marcus straightened his posture. "I'm here for the Jenkins case, courtroom 4B. The clerk's expression shifted to surprise, then thinly veiled skepticism. "You're the attorney of record?" "Yes, Marcus Taylor, representing the defendant." He maintained eye contact despite the familiar sting of being underestimated. This feeling wasn't new. Growing up in Roxbury's struggling neighborhoods, Marcus had been raised by his mother, Diana, who worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment. Their home might have lacked material comforts, but it was rich with love and determination. Diana had instilled in her son an unwavering belief. Education was his path forward. While other children played in the streets, Marcus often sat under the flickering light of their kitchen table, devouring books his mother rescued from library discards and thrift stores. Their apartment became a sanctuary of knowledge, with stacks of books occupying every available surface. "Knowledge doesn't care where you come from," Diana would tell him during their evening rituals of cocoa and reading. "It only cares where you're going." By 16, Marcus had distinguished himself at his public high school, particularly in mathematics and writing. His English teacher, Mrs. Hernandez, recognized his potential and encouraged him to enter a statewide essay competition. Against hundreds of applicants from wealthy suburbs and private schools, Marcus won with his piece on systemic inequalities in education. The prize, a full scholarship to Westfield Academy, one of Boston's most prestigious preparatory schools. The opportunity was life-changing, but it came with unexpected challenges. At Westfield, Marcus encountered a different kind of education, one in social hierarchies and privilege. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence," James Wellington. Thread had sneered on Marcus's first day, blocking his path to the classroom. "Did you take the wrong bus this morning? The community college is downtown." James, with his family's generations of wealth and influence, became Marcus's tormentor. The harassment ranged from misplaced assignments to cruel pranks and exclusion from study groups. Yet Marcus persevered, finding quiet corners of the library to study and forming alliances with a few sympathetic teachers. Despite the obstacles, Marcus graduated at the top of his class and earned a scholarship to Harvard Law School. The years that followed were a blur of lectures, late-night study sessions, and part-time jobs. He balanced textbooks and bills, classes and work shifts, never allowing himself the luxury of self-doubt. After graduating with honors, Marcus faced a harsh reality that his academic achievements couldn't shield him from. Law firm after law firm welcomed him for interviews, impressed by his resume, only to offer vague rejections afterward. He carried the right degrees, but lacked the right connections, the right background, the right look that firms sought in their polished brochures. "We're looking for someone who's a better cultural fit," became a familiar refrain, a thinly veiled code he understood all too well. When Marcus returned to his old neighborhood, the reception was different. His former neighbors, embraced him with pride, seeing in him the embodiment of possibilities they had been denied. It was Mrs. Jenkins who first approached him about legal help, her weathered hands trembling as she handed him a formal-looking notice. "They want to take my home, Marcus," she had explained, tears welling in her eyes. "Some company says they're building a shopping center. I've been here 43 years, this is all I have." The development company, Wellington Enterprises, had been buying properties throughout the neighborhood, transforming the landscape with luxury condominiums and upscale retail spaces. Most residents had sold under pressure or financial necessity. But Mrs. Jenkins refused. Her modest two-bedroom house held decades of memories, her children's height marks on the kitchen wall, her late husband's garden in the backyard, the porch where she had watched generations of neighborhood children grow. The eviction notice claimed the company had legal rights to the property based on an urban renewal project approved by the city council. The legal jargon was deliberately intimidating, designed to overwhelm residents without resources to fight back. "I can't pay you much," Mrs. Jenkins had admitted, pushing a small envelope of carefully saved bills toward him. "But I trust you, Marcus. I've watched you grow up. I know you'll do right by me." Marcus had refused the money. "Consider this my thank you for all the Sunday dinners and birthday cakes over the years." Now, standing in the imposing courthouse, Marcus felt the weight of that promise. He made his way to courtroom 4B, where Mrs. Jenkins waited on a hard wooden bench, her Sunday best pressed and worn, her grey hair neatly arranged beneath a small hat. "You look so handsome," she whispered, straightening his tie with maternal affection, "just like your father would have been proud to see." Before Marcus could respond, the courtroom doors opened and a familiar figure emerged, James Wellington III, now sporting an expensive haircut and a suit that cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Their eyes met in mutual recognition. James's expression shifted from confusion to amusement, then to something harder to define. "Marcus Taylor," James said, extending his hand with practiced charm. "What an unexpected surprise. I didn't realize you were involved in this little matter." Marcus accepted the handshake, noting the firm grip intended to intimidate. "Mrs. Jenkins is a family friend. I'm representing her interests." How quaint. James's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I'm sure this will be an enlightening experience for everyone involved." As they entered the courtroom, the judge, a stern-faced man with salt and pepper hair, glanced up from his papers. Judge Richard Harrington had a reputation for being impatient with inexperienced attorneys, and his frown deepened when he saw Marcus. "Mr. Taylor, is it? First appearance before this court." "Yes, Your Honor, but I'm fully prepared to—" "I don't have time to provide on-the-job training, Counselor. I expect you to know proper procedure," the judge's voice carried throughout the courtroom. "Let's not waste the court's time with amateur hour." From the corner of his eye, Marcus caught James's smirk. The familiar feeling of being underestimated settled in his stomach, not as defeat, but as fuel. He had overcome too much to be intimidated now. As he arranged his documents and placed a reassuring hand on Mrs. Jenkins's shoulder, Marcus made a silent promise. Today, against all expectations, justice would prevail. The proceedings began with clinical efficiency. Judge Harrington surveyed the courtroom with detached interest, his gaze lingering briefly on Mrs. Jenkins before settling on the attorneys before him. The stark contrast between James Wellington III in his tailored Armani suit and Marcus in his modest attire wasn't lost on anyone present. Wellington Enterprises versus Jenkins, case number 47293, the court clerk announced. Motion for summary judgment. James rose with practiced confidence, buttoning his jacket with a fluid motion. "Your Honor, this case is straightforward. The defendant is occupying property that has been designated for urban renewal under City Ordinance 1547. All legal requirements for notification were met. All appropriate permits have been secured." He gestured toward a thick binder of documents. "The development will create hundreds of jobs and significantly increase tax revenue for the district." Marcus observed the performance with a mixture of familiarity and determination. James hadn't changed since their school days, still leveraging privilege as though it were skill. still expecting the world to bend to his will. When Marcus's turn came, he approached the podium with measured steps. "Your Honor, my client has lived in her home for over 4 decades. The notification process was deliberately designed to confuse elderly residents with technical language and impossible deadlines. Furthermore, the community impact study significantly underestimates the displacement effects on long-term residents." Judge Harrington's expression remained impassive. "Do you have evidence of procedural violations, Mr. Taylor? Or are you merely offering opinions on policy?" "I have documentation showing systematic discrepancies in the notification timeline," Marcus replied, presenting his first exhibit. The certified letters were mailed 3 days after the published notice, giving residents like Mrs. Jenkins only 2 business days to respond, rather than the 10 days required by statute. A flicker of interest crossed the judge's face as he examined the evidence. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat, exchanging glances with his associate. For the next hour, Marcus methodically presented his case, highlighting the technical violations in the approval process. His preparation was evident, each point backed by statute, each argument focused on procedural requirements rather than emotional appeals. Mrs. Jenkins watched from her seat, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes never leaving Marcus. As the morning session neared its end, James requested permission to approach the bench. After a brief conference, Judge Harrington addressed the court. "In light of new information counsel wishes to present, we'll adjourn until 2 o'clock this afternoon." During the lunch break, Marcus and Mrs. Jenkins sat on a bench outside the courthouse, sharing a thermos of homemade soup she had brought. "You were magnificent in there," she said, patting his hand. "Reminded me of Perry Mason. Your mama would be so proud." Marcus smiled, though concern creased his brow. "James is planning something. That conference wasn't just procedural. That boy always was sneaky," Mrs. Jenkins remarked, her wisdom seeing through the years and the expensive suit to the child she remembered. "Used to steal apples from Mr. Finley's tree, then blame the other children." The afternoon session began with an unexpected development. James approached the podium with renewed confidence, a document held carefully in his manicured hands. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this into evidence. It's a deed transfer agreement signed by Mrs. Rose Jenkins in 1987, granting Wellington Properties first right of purchase in exchange for property improvements and tax assistance." Marcus felt as though the floor had dropped beneath him. Mrs. Jenkins clutched his arm, her whispered, "That's not true," barely audible. "Objection, Your Honor," Marcus called, rising quickly. "This document wasn't disclosed during discovery. It was recently located in our archive during a routine digitization project," James explained smoothly. "We've only just authenticated it ourselves." Judge Harrington examined the document. "I'll allow it, with the provision that Mr. Taylor has adequate time to review and respond. This hearing will resume in 3 days." He fixed Marcus with a stern gaze. "I suggest you use that time wisely, Counselor." Outside the courtroom, Marcus examined the photocopy James had provided. The yellow document bore what appeared to be Mrs. Jenkins's signature at the bottom, alongside a notary seal. "Rose, did you ever sign anything like this? Even years ago?" Mrs. Jenkins shook her head emphatically. "Never. The only thing I signed was when Thomas and I bought the house in 74 and when we refinanced in 82 to fix the roof." Her voice trembled with indignation. "That's not my signature. I never agreed to sell my home." That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the same table where he'd studied throughout childhood, surrounded by legal pads and reference books. The copied document seemed legitimate at first glance. Proper formatting, appropriate legal language for the period, and a signature that reasonably resembled Mrs. Jenkins's handwriting. His phone rang shortly after midnight. James Wellington's number flashed on the screen, surprising him. Against his better judgment, Marcus answered. "Impressive performance today." James's voice was casual, as if they were old friends catching up. "You've come a long way from Westfield Academy." "What do you want, James?" "To offer you an opportunity. Wellington Enterprises is expanding its legal department. We need someone with your unique perspective." Starting salary of $180,000, plus benefits and bonuses. Marcus sat stunned, the implications clear. You want me to drop Mrs. Jenkins' case? I want you to consider your future, James replied smoothly. One case, one client, or a career, with real influence. Think about it. Resources to help dozens of families like hers. Policy work that could change neighborhoods instead of just fighting over one house. The offer was tempting. More money than Marcus had ever seen. The security his mother had worked so hard to provide. The professional legitimacy he'd been denied. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine it. A corner office, respect from colleagues, financial stability. You have 24 hours, James added. After that, we proceed to judgment. Marcus couldn't sleep that night. The document haunted him. Something about it felt wrong, beyond Mrs. Jenkins's denial. He studied it obsessively, comparing it to other legal documents from the same period. Around dawn, he noticed something. The notary's stamp used a state seal design that wasn't adopted until 1989, though the document was supposedly from 1987. It was a small detail, easily overlooked, but it confirmed his suspicions. The document was fabricated. With renewed determination, Marcus began mapping out his investigation. He needed more than a suspicion. He needed proof that would stand up in court. His first stop that morning was the county records office. The clerk, an older woman named Beatrice, had worked there for decades. Marcus explained his situation, showing her the document. Thomas and Rose Jenkins, 1987, Beatrice mused, adjusting her glasses. I remember them. Lovely couple. He always brought me coffee when they came to handle paperwork. She examined the document carefully. This notary, Gerald Wilson, he worked for Wellington Senior back then, handled most of their property dealings until the scandal. Scandal? Marcus perked up. Beatrice lowered her voice. It was hushed up, but Gerald was dismissed for irregularities in documentation. Several properties had questionable transfers. Nothing was ever proven in court, but she shook her head meaningfully. This was the thread Marcus needed. He spent the next day tracking down Gerald Wilson, eventually locating him in a retirement community outside the city. The former notary, now in his 70s, was initially reluctant to speak about his time with Wellington Enterprises. That was a different life, he said, hands trembling slightly as he poured tea. I've made my peace. Mrs. Jenkins could lose. Her home based on a document you supposedly notarized, Marcus pressed. A document we both know isn't legitimate. Gerald's eyes darted nervously around his small apartment. You don't understand the pressure. Mr. Wellington Sr. had plans for that neighborhood long before his son took over. Those who wouldn't were persuaded through other means. Like forged documents, the old man's silence was confirmation enough. After more gentle prodding, Gerald agreed to provide a written statement about the company's practices, including the backdating of documents and forging of signatures. It wasn't a direct admission about Mrs. Jenkins's case, but it established a pattern that would be difficult to ignore. As Marcus gathered evidence, he also reached out to former employees of Wellington Enterprises, finding several who remembered the company's aggressive acquisition tactics. One former secretary, Patricia Morales, had kept personal notes documenting questionable practices. I always thought someone would investigate someday, she told Marcus, handing over a small notebook filled with dates and cryptic notations. James's father wasn't concerned with how things got done, just that they did. James learned from the best. 2 days later, with hours to spare before the hearing resumed, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at his modest office, a converted bedroom in his apartment. Lisa Chen, a forensic document examiner recommended by one of his law school professors, had agreed to examine the questioned document at a reduced fee. The paper stock is wrong for the period, she explained, pointing out details under a portable microscope. And the ink shows accelerated aging, artificially created to appear older than it is. Most telling, the signature has the hallmarks of being traced, not naturally written. With Lisa's preliminary report and statements from Gerald and Patricia, Marcus prepared for the final confrontation. He worked through the night, organizing evidence, preparing exhibits, and rehearsing his arguments. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, he thought of Mrs. Jenkins, of her unwavering faith in him, of the home she stood to lose, of the community being dismantled one property at a time. As dawn broke on the morning of the hearing, Marcus received another call from James. "Have you considered my offer?" Marcus thought of his mother's words. "Knowledge doesn't care where you come from, it only cares where you're going." "I have," Marcus replied, "and I'll see you in court." The courtroom buzzed with tension as Marcus arrived for the resumed hearing. News of the case had spread through the community, drawing a larger audience than before. In the gallery sat several of Mrs. Jenkins's neighbors, Diana Taylor, Marcus's mother, and a handful of law students who had heard about the young attorney challenging Wellington Enterprises. James Wellington entered with his usual flourish, accompanied by two associates carrying additional binders of documents, a show of force meant to intimidate. He nodded cordially toward Marcus, his smile betraying no concern. "All right," announced the bailiff as Judge Harrington entered. The judge settled into his chair, reviewing notes from the previous session. "We're here to continue Wellington Enterprises versus Jenkins," he stated. "Mr. Wellington has introduced new evidence in the form of a 1987 agreement. Mr. Taylor, you've had time to review this document. How do you wish to proceed?" Marcus rose steadily. "Your Honor, we move to exclude this document as fraudulent and request sanctions against Wellington Enterprises for attempting to introduce falsified evidence." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. James's confident expression faltered momentarily before he regained composure. "That's a serious allegation, Mr. Taylor," Judge Harrington noted, his interest visibly piqued. "I assume you have substantial evidence to support such a claim." "We do, Your Honor." Marcus approached the bench with a folder. "First, I'd like to present the expert analysis of Lisa Chen, a certified forensic document examiner." Lisa took the stand, her testimony precise and technical as she detailed the inconsistencies in the document. She explained how the paper composition didn't match documents from the purported time period, how the ink showed signs of artificial aging, and most damning, how the signature appeared to be traced rather than naturally written. James objected, repeatedly questioning Lisa's credentials and methodology, but her responses were unflappable. Years of testifying in court had prepared her for such challenges. "And can you state with professional certainty that this document is not authentic?" "To 1987, Marcus asked. "Yes," Lisa confirmed, "based on multiple factors: the paper stock, the ink composition, the state seal used in the notary stamp, which wasn't adopted until 1989, and the signature characteristics. This document was created much more recently and artificially aged to appear older." Next, Marcus called Gerald Wilson to the stand. The elderly former notary appeared nervous but resolute as he described the practices at Wellington Enterprises during his employment. "It was common practice to create documentation after the fact," Gerald testified, avoiding James's glare. "Mr. Wellington Sr. expected results. If a property owner wouldn't sell, we found ways to create leverage. And did these ways include backdating documents or falsifying signatures?" Gerald hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, it happened several times." "Objection." James was on his feet. "Mr. Wilson's vague allegations about practices from decades ago are not relevant to this specific document." "I'll allow it," Judge Harrington ruled. "The witness is establishing context for the document in question." Marcus continued methodically, presenting additional witnesses who corroborated the pattern of questionable practices at Wellington Enterprises. Patricia Morales' testimony about the company's acquisition tactics was particularly compelling, her detailed notes providing dates and property addresses that corresponded with suspicious transactions. Throughout the proceedings, Marcus maintained a calm, professional demeanor, a stark contrast to James, who grew increasingly agitated, whispering urgently to his associates and sending texts beneath the table. During a brief recess, James cornered Marcus in the hallway. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, his polished veneer cracking. This isn't just about one old woman's house anymore. You're attacking my family's reputation. I'm presenting facts, James, Marcus replied evenly. If those facts damage your reputation, perhaps you should consider why. When court resumed, Marcus called his final witness, Mrs. Jenkins herself. The elderly woman approached the stand, slowly, her dignity evident in every careful step. After being sworn in, she sat straight-backed in the witness chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Mrs. Jenkins, have you ever signed an agreement with Wellington Properties regarding the sale or transfer of your home? No, sir, I have not, she replied firmly. That home was bought with my husband Thomas's VA loan after he served in Vietnam. We raised our children there. We planted every tree in that yard together. Her voice remained steady. After Thomas passed, I promised him I'd keep our home for as long as I could. I would never have signed it away. James's cross-examination was aggressive, attempting to confuse the elderly woman about dates and documents, but Mrs. Jenkins remained unshaken. Young man, she said finally, looking directly at James, I may be old, but my mind and my integrity are intact. I know what I did and did not sign, and I remember you as a child taking shortcuts even then. Some things don't change. A few spectators chuckled, earning a sharp look from the judge. For his closing argument, Marcus stood before the court without notes, speaking directly to Judge Harrington. Your Honor, the evidence before you demonstrates not just a questionable document, but a pattern of behavior spanning decades. Wellington Enterprises has consistently used its power and resources to acquire properties through any means necessary, regardless of legality or ethics. The document they've presented is demonstrably false, created recently to manufacture a claim where none exists. He gestured toward Mrs. Jenkins. My client has lived in her home for 43 years. She has paid her taxes, maintained her property, and contributed to her community. She asks only to continue living where her memories and her life's work reside. The law exists to protect citizens like Mrs. Jenkins from precisely this kind of corporate overreach. James's closing argument was technically proficient, but lacked conviction. The evidence against the document's authenticity was too substantial to easily dismiss, and his attempts to discredit the witnesses had fallen flat. Judge Harrington listened attentively to both sides before addressing the courtroom. This court will recess to consider the evidence presented. Given the serious nature of the allegations regarding falsified documents, I'll be reviewing all exhibits personally. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 for my ruling. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, drawn by rumors of forged documents and corporate misconduct. Marcus declined to comment, escorting Mrs. Jenkins through the crowd to where Diana waited with her car. You did well in there, Diana told her son, embracing him tightly. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. That evening, as Marcus prepared for the judge's ruling, his phone rang again, this time displaying the number for Wellington Enterprises' corporate office. He answered cautiously. Mr. Taylor, this is Barbara Winters, General Counsel for Wellington Enterprises. The woman's voice was crisp and businesslike. In light of today's developments, we'd like to discuss a potential resolution before tomorrow's ruling. I'm listening, Marcus replied, surprised by this new approach. Wellington Enterprises is prepared to withdraw its claim on Mrs. Jenkins's property with a written acknowledgement that the document in question is not being relied upon. Additionally, we're offering a neighborhood improvement grant of $1 million to be administered by a community board, with no strings attached regarding property acquisition. Marcus considered the offer. It would secure Mrs. Jenkins's home and provide substantial benefits to the community, but it would also allow Wellington Enterprises to avoid public accountability for the forged document. And what does Wellington Enterprises want in return? A confidential settlement, no public statements regarding document authenticity. The lawsuit ends quietly, and we all move forward. It was tempting, an immediate win for Mrs. Jenkins without the uncertainty of a judicial ruling, but something about it felt wrong. I'll need to discuss this with my client, Marcus said finally. But I should tell you, Mrs. Jenkins values truth as much as she values her home. After ending the call, Marcus drove to Mrs. Jenkins' house. They sat on her porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk as he explained the settlement offer. It would guarantee you keep your home, he concluded, and the neighborhood would benefit from the grant. Mrs. Jenkins was silent for a long moment, gently rocking the swing with her foot. My Thomas used to say that a half-truth is still a whole lie, she said finally. If we take their money and their silence, what message does that send? That, if you have enough money, you can buy your way out of wrongdoing? She shook her head firmly. No, Marcus. Some things matter more than money or even certainty. We'll hear what the judge has to say. Marcus nodded, a mix of relief and pride washing over him. He had hoped she would feel this way. Later that night, unable to sleep, Marcus sat at his window overlooking the city. The lights of downtown glittered in the distance, including the illuminated Wellington Tower, a monument to wealth and influence. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine an alternate path, accepting James's job offer, working in that tower, having the resources and connections he'd been denied. But at what cost? The question echoed in his mind as dawn approached. By morning, he had his answer. The courtroom was packed when Judge Harrington entered precisely at 9 o'clock. His expression gave nothing away as he took his seat and surveyed the assembled parties. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, I am prepared to issue my ruling, he began, his voice filling the hushed courtroom. This case has raised serious questions about document authenticity and corporate ethics that go beyond a simple property dispute. Marcus felt Mrs. Jenkins's hand grip his arm, her strength belying her years. Across the aisle, James sat rigid, eyes fixed on the judge. Judge Harrington cleared his throat, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. First, regarding the 1987 document presented by Wellington Enterprises, I find clear and convincing evidence that this document is not authentic. The expert testimony regarding paper composition, ink analysis, and signature characteristics leaves little room for doubt. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. James Wellington's jaw tightened visibly as he stared straight ahead, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Second, the judge continued, I am deeply troubled by the evidence suggesting this was not an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern of questionable business practices. The testimony of former employees Gerald Wilson and Patricia Morales indicates that similar tactics may have been employed in other property acquisitions. Judge Harrington looked directly at James. Mr. Wellington, as an officer of this court, you have a duty of candor that supersedes your obligations to your client. Introducing evidence that you knew or should have known was fraudulent constitutes a serious ethical violation. For the first time, James appeared genuinely shaken. His carefully cultivated image of confidence crumbled as he realized the potential professional consequences. Therefore, the judge announced, I am ruling in favor of the defendant, Mrs. Rose Jenkins. The claim by Wellington Enterprises is dismissed with prejudice. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential document fraud and the State Bar Association for review of Mr. Wellington's conduct. Mrs. Jenkins clasped her hands to her chest, tears welling in her eyes. Around her, neighbors and supporters exchanged silent looks of triumph and relief. Furthermore, Judge Harrington added, looking directly at Marcus, I wish to commend Mr. Taylor for his diligence in uncovering this fraudulent activity. His thorough investigation and presentation exemplify the highest standards of legal advocacy. The judge struck his gavel once. This court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in cheers and applause. Mrs. Jenkins embraced Marcus, her tears dampening his suit jacket. Thank you, she whispered. Thomas would be so proud. As they turned to leave, Marcus caught sight of James rushing from the courtroom, reporters in pursuit. Their eyes met briefly. James's filled with a mixture of anger and grudging respect. Marcus's steady and unburdened. News of the ruling spread quickly through the community and beyond. Local television stations featured the story prominently. Young attorney exposes corporate fraud, saves elderly woman's home. Social media amplified the narrative, with clips of Marcus and Mrs. Jenkins descending the courthouse steps shared thousands of times. What had begun as a simple eviction case transformed into a symbol of resistance against corporate overreach. In the days that followed, Marcus's small apartment was flooded with calls, from potential clients facing similar situations, from community organizations seeking legal guidance, and perhaps most surprisingly, from established law firms suddenly interested in his talents. One afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside his building. A representative from Garrison & Moore, one of Boston's most prestigious firms, arrived with an offer: a junior partnership position with a substantial starting salary and the freedom to continue his community advocacy work part-time. Your performance in the Jenkins case impressed our partners, the representative explained. We could use someone with your unique perspective. The offer was tempting. Financial security, professional recognition, resources to help more people, everything he had worked for throughout his education. Yet something held him back. That evening, Marcus visited Mrs. Jenkins, finding her on her porch surrounded by neighbors celebrating her victory. The atmosphere was festive, with homemade food spread across folding tables and children playing in the yard that Wellington Enterprises had coveted. "There he is!" Mrs. Jenkins called out, waving him over. "Our hero!" Marcus shook his head, embarrassed by the attention. "I just did my job, Mrs. Jenkins." "And then some," added Mr. Washington, an elderly resident from across the street. "My grandson showed me how many people are talking about your case online. You've given folks hope." As the evening progressed, Marcus listened to stories, not just about Wellington Enterprises, but about other developers, landlords, and companies exploiting communities like this one across the city. Each narrative revealed a common thread: people with legitimate grievances, but without the knowledge or resources to fight effectively within the legal system. By morning, Marcus had made his decision. He declined the offer from Garrison & Moore, explaining that he needed to pursue a different path. Instead, he used the small inheritance from his grandfather to rent a storefront in the neighborhood, a former barbershop with large windows and worn wooden floors. Community Justice Center, read the simple sign he hung above the door. Inside, he arranged a few desks, a collection of legal resources, and a coffee maker that ran continuously. The center would provide affordable legal assistance to residents facing housing issues, unfair employment practices, consumer scams, and other injustices that typically went unchallenged. Word spread quickly. Within weeks, the center was bustling with activity. Local law students volunteered their time, eager to gain practical experience under Marcus's guidance. Retired attorneys offered pro bono hours. Community organizers coordinated Know Your Rights workshops. What began as one man's response to injustice evolved into a collective movement. James Wellington's professional fall was swift and severe. The state bar investigation uncovered additional instances of ethical violations, resulting in a suspension of his license. Wellington Enterprises, facing public scrutiny and potential criminal charges, announced a reorganization and the implementation of new ethical guidelines. The development project that would have displaced Mrs. Jenkins and her neighbors was quietly abandoned. 6 months after the court victory, Marcus received an unexpected visitor at the Community Justice Center. Judge Harrington, dressed in casual clothes rather than his judicial robes, stood somewhat awkwardly in the reception area. "Mr. Taylor," he greeted Marcus formally. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Your Honor," Marcus replied, surprised. "What can I do for you?" Judge Harrington surveyed the busy center, volunteers assisting clients, a workshop in progress in the corner, walls covered with community resources and success stories. "I've been watching what you've built here," the judge said. "It's impressive. More importantly, it's necessary." He hesitated before continuing. "I may have misjudged you when we first met in my courtroom. For that, I apologize." Marcus nodded, accepting the apology without comment. "I'm establishing a court community partnership program," Judge Harrington explained, "connecting legal resources with neighborhoods that need them most. I'd like your center to be our first official partner." The partnership brought additional funding and resources, allowing the Community Justice Center to expand its services. Marcus hired a small staff, including Patricia Morales, whose courage in testifying against her former employer had cost her professionally but gained her respect throughout the community. 1 year after the landmark case, the center hosted a celebration. The event honored Mrs. Jenkins and others who had successfully fought against displacement. Local officials attended, as did representatives from law schools and community organizations from across the state. The modest storefront could barely contain the crowd that spilled onto the sidewalk. During the celebration, Diana Taylor pulled her son aside, her eyes shining with pride. "Your father would be amazed," she told him, straightening his tie just as she had done throughout his childhood. "He always said you had a fire in you." Marcus smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. From the kitchen table covered with second-hand books to Harvard Law, from rejection letters to the courthouse victory that changed everything. "I had good teachers," he replied, embracing his mother. Later that evening, as the crowd thinned, Marcus found himself alone with Mrs. Jenkins in the quiet office at the back of the center. She studied the framed newspaper article about their case that hung on the wall. "Did I ever tell you about my grandmother?" she asked suddenly. "She was born into slavery in South Carolina, lived to be 103. Used to tell me, 'Rose, when you stand up for yourself, you never stand alone.'" She patted Marcus's hand. "Look around you. All these people standing together because one person refused to be silenced." The Community Justice Center continued to grow, eventually establishing satellite offices in other underserved neighborhoods. Marcus declined numerous offers from prestigious firms, universities, and political campaigns, choosing instead to remain connected to the communities he served. He did, however, accept occasional invitations to speak at law schools, where he challenged students to consider the true purpose of their legal education. "The law is not merely a career path," he would tell them. "It's a tool, one that can either reinforce existing power structures or help dismantle them. The choice is yours." 3 years after the Jenkins case, Marcus received a formal invitation from the Boston Bar Association to receive their Public Service Award. The ceremony would be held in the Grand Ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton, a space that once would have seemed as inaccessible to him as the moon. As he stood at the podium accepting the award, Marcus scanned the audience filled with judges, senior partners, and legal luminaries, the establishment that had once closed its doors to him. Now they applauded his achievements, perhaps seeing in him a convenient symbol of the system's capacity for inclusion. "This award recognizes one individual," Marcus said, "but represents the work of many. The grandmother who saved books from the trash for a curious child, the mother who worked 3 jobs to keep a roof overhead, the teacher who recognized potential where others saw only circumstance, the elderly neighbor who trusted a novice attorney with her most precious possession." He paused, letting the words settle. "Justice is not achieved in courtrooms alone. It's built in communities, one relationship at a time." Among those in attendance was a rehabilitated James Wellington, now working for a non-profit focused on ethical urban development, a transformation few would have predicted. After the ceremony, he approached Marcus cautiously. "Congratulations," James offered, extending his hand. "You've built something remarkable." Marcus accepted the handshake, noting how circumstances had reversed since their school days. "Everyone deserves a second chance, James, even those who never gave others their first." The comment hung between them, not quite forgiveness, not quite accusation, but an acknowledgement of their shared history and divergent paths. In the years that followed, the Community Justice Center became a model replicated in cities across the country. Marcus Taylor's name became synonymous with a new approach to legal advocacy, one that valued community knowledge alongside formal expertise, that saw clients as partners rather than cases. On the 10th anniversary of the center's founding, a documentary film crew arrived to capture its impact. They interviewed dozens of clients, volunteers, and community members whose lives had been touched by the center's work. The resulting film, titled Standing Together, premiered at a national conference on access to justice. After the screening, a young law student approached Marcus. "Your story changed my career path," she told him. "I was headed for corporate law, but now I'm focusing on housing rights." Marcus smiled, recognizing in her the same determination that had driven him. "What's your name?" "Jasmine Jenkins," she replied. "Rose Jenkins is my grandmother." The circle had completed itself. The elderly woman whose home he had saved now had a granddaughter following in his footsteps, extending the legacy of justice to a new generation. This, Marcus realized, was his true victory, not the courtroom triumph or professional accolades, but the ripples of change spreading outward from one act of standing up against injustice. As Marcus looked around at the community he had helped build, diverse, resilient, engaged, he thought again of his mother's words. "Knowledge doesn't care where you come from. It only cares where you're going." He had gone further than anyone expected, not by leaving his community behind, but by bringing it with him, proving that justice was not a destination, but a journey taken together. Dear listeners, we hope Marcus Taylor's journey has touched your heart and inspired you to believe in the power of determination and justice. For more emotional and powerful stories like this one, we've prepared a special playlist that explores themes of resilience and triumph against all odds. Find it by clicking on the link to the left. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we share compelling narratives that illuminate the depth and complexity of the human experience. Don't miss our upcoming content that will take you on similar emotional journeys.